Step away from the truck. Show me your papers right now.
I'm a U.S. citizen, retired Marine major. You're getting my Arizona ID, not papers.
That license doesn't prove status. Turn around, hands on the tailgate, you're being detained.
If you cuff me without checking my passport card in that wallet, this becomes a federal lawsuit on camera.
Agent Kyle Vanner had been a field agent with Immigration and Customs Enforcement for just under 4 years when he made the decision that would end his career, humiliate his agency, and cost the federal government $7.9 million. He was 32 years old, ambitious and driven by a metric-focused mindset that prioritized arrest numbers over investigative due diligence. Vanner operated with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, believing his instincts were sharper than the law required. On a blistering Tuesday morning in Phoenix, Arizona, those instincts led him to a busy grocery store parking lot, where he spotted a man he decided didn't belong. That man was Marcus Thorne, a 58-year-old retired Marine Corps major and a decorated combat veteran with a Silver Star. Thorne was a black man, a father, a grandfather, and a United States citizen born in Detroit, Michigan. What Vanner did next, ignoring Thorne's calm assertions of citizenship, refusing to look at valid identification, and shackling a man who had served his country for 3 decades, would become a definitive case study in how unchecked bias blinds law enforcement to reality. Before we get into the details of this case, tell us where you are watching from today. And if you believe that those who serve our country deserve better than to be treated like criminals in their own neighborhoods, please hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring these necessary stories to a wider audience. The setting was the sprawling parking lot of a Market Choice grocery center in North Phoenix. It is the sort of place that serves as a hub for the community, surrounded by hardware stores and strip malls, always packed with pickup trucks, SUVs, and sedans baking under the relentless Arizona sun. It was 11:30 a.m. The temperature had already climbed past 90 degrees, creating shimmering waves of heat off the asphalt. The lot was busy with mid-morning shoppers, retirees, contractors on lunch breaks, and parents running errands while their children were in school. There was a rhythm to the place, the sound of shopping carts rattling over pavement and engines idling with air conditioners blasting. Marcus Thorne had arrived at the Market Choice at 11 a.m. He drove a pristine charcoal gray Ford F-150, a retirement gift to himself after leaving the Corps. Thorne was a man of routine and discipline. At 58, he kept himself in peak physical condition, his posture still carrying the ramrod straightness of an officer who had commanded battalions. He was dressed for the heat, but with his usual neatness, a navy blue polo shirt tucked into khaki cargo shorts and sturdy, well-worn work boots. He had spent 30 minutes inside the store picking up supplies for a home renovation project he was working on for his daughter, bottled water, heavy-duty trash bags, and cleaning supplies. He wasn't rushing. He moved with the deliberate, observant pace of a man who had spent a lifetime paying attention to his surroundings. Agent Kyle Vanner was patrolling the area in an unmarked SUV, though the vehicle was unmistakably law enforcement to anyone who looked closely tinted windows, extra antennas, and government plates. Vanner had been tasked with a routine surveillance sweep of a nearby construction site suspected of employing undocumented labor, but the site had been empty. Frustrated and empty-handed, Vanner decided to cruise the commercial lots looking for anything that fit his profile of suspicious activity. In Vanner's mind, the criteria for suspicion were fluid, often relying on gut feelings that he couldn't quite articulate in a report, but felt justified acting upon. He was looking for a win. He was looking for a stat. He parked his SUV in a shady spot near the exit of the Market Choice lot, scanning the rows of cars, waiting for something to catch his eye. He didn't know it yet, but he was on a collision course with a man who knew more about duty honor and the Constitution than Vanner would ever learn in his training manuals. The catalyst for the disaster that was about to unfold wasn't just Vanner's ambition. It was the incompetence of a second man. Derek Slayton was 29 years old, a private security guard hired by the property management company to deter shoplifters and keep the fire lanes clear. Slayton had applied to the police academy twice, and had been rejected twice, once for failing the psychological evaluation and once for physical fitness issues. He wore his uniform, a polyester button-down with a generic security patch, with an air of self-importance that far exceeded his actual authority. He carried a flashlight, a radio that barely worked, and a deep-seated desire to be part of the real action. Slayton spent most of his shifts patrolling the lot in a golf cart looking for minor infractions he could blow out of proportion. From his vantage point near the cart return, Slayton watched Marcus Thorne exit the store. Thorne was pushing a heavy cart loaded with cases of water and large boxes. He reached his truck, unlocked the tailgate, and began loading the supplies. To a normal observer, this was a man buying groceries. To Derek Slayton, who was bored and eager to prove his worth, Thorne's behavior seemed off. Slayton watched as Thorne finished loading the truck, then walked around to the front, popped the hood, and pulled out a rag to check the oil dipstick. Thorne was meticulous about his vehicle. He checked his fluids every time he filled up or carried a heavy load. It was a habit from the motor pool, but Slayton interpreted this differently. In his mind, a man lingering by his truck looking under the hood in a parking lot wasn't maintaining his vehicle, he was waiting for someone. He was stalling. It looked like a drug drop, or maybe a pickup for human smuggling, a narrative Slayton had concocted entirely from cable news and his own imagination. Slayton spotted the black SUV with government plates idling in the shade. He recognized the type of vehicle immediately, seeing a chance to be useful to real law enforcement. Slayton drove his golf cart over to Vanner's window. He tapped on the glass. Vanner rolled the window down halfway, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Can I help you?" Vanner asked, his eyes hidden behind aviator sunglasses. Slayton leaned in, conspiratorial and breathless. "I think I've got something for you, officer. There's a male subject over in row 4. Black male, late 50s. He's been loitering by that pickup truck for 20 minutes. Pretending to fix his engine, but he's keeping his head on a swivel. Looks like he's waiting for a drop. I've seen this kind of thing before." Slayton hadn't seen anything of the sort before, but he wanted to sound experienced. Vanner's interest was piqued. This was the lead he had been looking for. "Is he alone?" Vanner asked. "Solo," Slayton confirmed. "But he looks nervous. Big guy. Could be a runner." Vanner didn't ask for specifics. He didn't ask what evidence Slayton had beyond looking nervous. He didn't ask if the man had actually committed a crime. He heard suspicious black male and loitering, and his bias filled in the rest of the picture. "I'll check it out," Vanner said, putting the SUV into gear. "Thanks for the tip." Slayton beamed, feeling like he had just initiated a major bust. He drove his cart to a safe distance to watch the show, pulling out his personal cell phone to record, hoping to capture the takedown he had helped orchestrate. Vanner drove slowly down row 4, spotting the charcoal Ford F-150. Thorne had finished checking his oil and was wiping his hands on a shop rag. He closed the hood of the truck with a solid thud and walked around to the driver's side door. He was just reaching for the handle when Vanner's SUV pulled up diagonally behind him, blocking Thorne from backing out. It was an aggressive maneuver designed to intimidate and prevent flight. Thorne paused, hands still on the door handle, and turned to look at the vehicle. He didn't run. He didn't look panicked. He looked annoyed. He watched as the door of the SUV opened, and a man in a tactical vest with police ice emblazoned on the back stepped out. Thorne stood his ground. He had faced down insurgents in Fallujah and commanded men in life-or-death situations. A 32-year-old federal agent in a grocery store parking lot did not intimidate him. He assumed the officer was looking for someone else or needed to ask a question about the area. Thorne placed his hands visibly on his hips, a non-threatening posture, and waited. Vanner approached rapidly, one hand resting near his holstered sidearm, his body language screaming aggression. He didn't start with a greeting. He didn't introduce himself. He stopped 6 feet from Thorne and barked, "Step away from the vehicle." Thorne frowned slightly but complied, taking a single step back. Can I help you, officer? Thorne asked, his voice deep and steady. Vanner ignored the question. He was scanning Thorne, looking for the nervousness Slayton had promised. He didn't see it, which only made him more suspicious. In Vanner's experience, people who weren't nervous around law enforcement were either innocent or seasoned criminals. Vanner had already decided Thorne wasn't innocent. "What are you doing here?" Vanner demanded. "I'm shopping," Thorne said, gesturing to the cart return where he had just left his buggy. "Just bought some supplies. Is there a problem?" "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this lot," Vanner said, using the vague catch-all phrase that allowed him to stop anyone he wanted. "Loitering. Potential trafficking." Thorne actually laughed a short, dry chuckle. "Trafficking, son, I'm buying water and bleach for a remodel. You can check the bed of the truck." Vanner bristled at the word son. He took a step closer, invading Thorne's personal space. "I need to see your papers," Vanner said. It was a specific choice of words. Not identification, not driver's license, but papers. It was a phrase loaded with implication, a phrase directed at someone Vanner assumed was not a citizen. Thorne's demeanor changed instantly. The amusement vanished, replaced by the cold, hard stare of a field officer. He recognized exactly what was happening. He had fought for the flag on Vanner's vest, and now that flag was being used to insult him. "My papers," Thorne repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "I am a United States citizen. I don't carry papers. I carry a driver's license." Vanner shook his head dismissively. "I need proof of citizenship. Passport, green card, or employment authorization. Now." "I am not a foreigner," Thorne stated clearly, articulating every syllable. "I am a retired major in the United States Marine Corps. I am a citizen of this country. I have an Arizona driver's license in my pocket. That is all you are getting." Thorne moved his hand slowly toward his back pocket. "Don't reach!" Vanner shouted, his hand gripping the handle of his gun. Thorne froze. "I am reaching for my wallet," Thorne said calmly, "to show you the ID you asked for." "I didn't ask for a license," Vanner snapped. "I asked for proof of status. We have reason to believe you are in the country illegally." The accusation hung in the hot air between them. It was absurd. Thorne spoke unaccented American English. He was driving a late-model truck registered in his name. He was dressed like half the fathers in the parking lot. The only reason Vanner was questioning his status was the color of his skin. "Reason to believe based on what?" Thorne asked. "Based on the fact that I'm black and fixing my truck, is that your probable cause?" Vanner's face reddened. He wasn't used to suspects debating him. He was used to fear. He was used to compliance. "Based on information received," Vanner lied, doubling down on Slayton's baseless tip. "Now, are you going to provide documentation, or am I going to detain you for failure to identify and obstruction?" Thorne knew the law. He knew that in Arizona he was required to identify himself if lawfully detained, but he also knew that Vanner had no reasonable suspicion for the stop. However, Thorne was also a pragmatist. He knew that arguing on the side of the road with an agitated agent could get him killed. He decided to provide the ID, confident that it would end the encounter, even though he was furious. "I am going to retrieve my wallet," Thorne announced again. "Slowly." Vanner didn't draw his gun, but he kept his hand on it. Thorne pulled out a brown leather bifold wallet. He flipped it open. Inside, visible in the window, was his Arizona driver's license. He held it out for Vanner to see. "Arizona driver's license. Valid. Issued to Marcus Thorne." Vanner glanced at it but didn't take it. "That doesn't prove citizenship," Vanner said. "Anyone can get a license." This was legally incorrect and practically nonsensical in this context, but Vanner was no longer operating on logic. He was operating on ego. He had challenged this man and he needed to win. "It proves I am who I say I am," Thorne said. "And if you run that name, You'll see I have no warrants and a clean record. Now am I free to go?" Vanner sneered. "No, you're not. I suspect that license is fraudulent, and until I can verify your country of origin, you're not going anywhere." Vanner was digging a hole, and instead of climbing out, he was asking for a shovel. He looked around. A small crowd had started to gather. Shoppers were pausing, sensing the tension. Phones were coming out. A woman near a minivan was recording. A man in a work shirt was watching closely. Vanner felt the eyes on him. He needed to assert control. "Turn around and place your hands on the truck," Vanner ordered. Thorne stared at him. "You are making a mistake," Thorne said. "A very expensive mistake." "Turn around," Vanner shouted, unholstering his taser this time, pointing the yellow plastic weapon at Thorne's chest. The sight of the weapon caused a gasp from the bystanders. "He's not doing anything," a woman shouted from the sidewalk. "He showed you his ID." Vanner ignored the crowd. "Last warning, hands on the truck." Thorne looked at the taser, then at Vanner's eyes. He saw the panic and the pride warring in the younger man. Thorne knew that if he resisted physically, Vanner would pull the trigger and then likely claim Thorne had attacked him. The narrative would be lost. Thorne decided to win the war by losing this battle. He turned slowly and placed his large, calloused hands on the hot metal of his truck bed. "I am complying under duress," Thorne announced loud enough for the witnesses to hear. "I am a United States citizen being detained without cause." Vanner holstered the taser and grabbed Thorne's wrist, twisting it behind his back with unnecessary force. He slapped a handcuff on the left wrist, then grabbed the right. Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He stood like a statue, letting Vanner perform his theater of dominance. The cuffs clicked shut tight against the bone. Vanner patted Thorne down, roughly checking his pockets. He pulled the wallet out of Thorne's hand and shoved it into his own pocket without looking at it. "You're under arrest for suspicion of alien smuggling and resisting a federal agent," Vanner announced. "Check the wallet," Thorne said calmly, his cheek pressed against the side of his truck. "Behind the license, there is a U.S. passport card and a Department of Defense retired identification card. If you look at them, you can end this now." Vanner didn't look. He didn't want to look. If he looked and saw they were real, he would have to admit he was wrong in front of 20 people with cameras. It was easier to pretend they didn't exist or were fake until he got Thorne back to the station where he could control the narrative. "I'll process your evidence at the station," Vanner said. "High-quality fakes are common." Vanner spun Thorne around. The sight of the older man, dignified even in handcuffs, being manhandled by the younger agent struck a chord with the crowd. "This is shameful," an older man shouted. "That man is a veteran. Look at the sticker on his truck." Indeed, on the rear window of the F-150 was a decal USMC, Semper Fi, 2nd Battalion. Vanner ignored it. He marched Thorne toward the SUV. Thorne walked with his head up. He made eye contact with the woman recording on her phone. He nodded to her, a silent signal to keep filming. Vanner opened the back door of the SUV and pushed Thorne inside. The cage was cramped, smelling of stale coffee and plastic. Thorne sat awkwardly, his hands painful behind his back. Vanner slammed the door. As he walked around to the driver's seat, Vanner felt a surge of adrenaline. He had his suspect. He would find something. Maybe the truck was stolen. Maybe the ID was fake. He convinced himself that he was right, because he had to be right. He couldn't imagine a world where he had just arrested an innocent man based on nothing but prejudice. The drive to the Phoenix-on-CE field office took 20 minutes. Thorne spent the time memorizing details. He noted the time on the dashboard clock. He noted Vanner's speed. He noted the fact that Vanner never radioed in the stop to dispatch a violation of protocol. Thorne was building his case file in his head. He remained silent, refusing to give Vanner any more ammunition. Vanner glanced in the rearview mirror, occasionally expecting Thorne to beg or bargain. Thorne just looked out the window, watching the city pass by, his face a mask of resolve. When they arrived at the field office, Vanner pulled into the secure sally port. He helped Thorne out of the vehicle, though helped was a generous term for the way he yanked the older man by the arm. They walked into the processing area, a sterile room with fluorescent lights and linoleum floors. Several other agents were at their desks. They looked up as Vanner brought in his catch. Vanner was beaming slightly, projecting the image of an agent who had just taken down a major threat. "Processing one for failure to identify and suspicion of illegal entry," Vanner announced to the room. He guided Thorne to a metal bench and pushed him down. "Sit." Thorne sat. "I need my wallet," Thorne said. "It contains my federal identification." Vanner ignored him and walked over to the intake desk to start the paperwork. At that moment, the door to the inner offices opened and Assistant Special Agent in Charge Michael Reynolds walked out. Reynolds was 55 years old, a career law enforcement officer who had started in Border Patrol and worked his way up. He was tired, overworked, and had zero tolerance for incompetence. He held a mug of coffee in one hand and a file in the other. He glanced at the bench and stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't see a suspect. He saw a man who carried himself like a fellow officer, and then he looked closer. Reynolds walked over to the bench. He looked at Thorne. "Sir," Reynolds asked, "can I help you?" Thorne looked up. "I am Major Marcus Thorne, USMC retired. This agent arrested me in a parking lot while I was buying groceries. He has refused to verify my citizenship. My credentials are in my wallet, which is currently in his pocket." Reynolds turned slowly to look at Vanner, who was typing at a computer terminal. "Vanner," Reynolds said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Come here." Vanner looked up, surprised by the tone. He walked over. "Yeah, boss, just booking this guy. Refused to show papers." Reynolds held out his hand. "Give me the wallet." Vanner hesitated. "Boss, he claims he has ID, but you know how good the fakes are these days. Give me the wallet." Reynolds' voice echoed in the silent room. Vanner reached into his pocket and handed over the brown leather wallet. Reynolds opened it. He pulled out the Arizona license. He ran his thumb over the hologram. It was real. He flipped the flap. There, in the clear plastic sleeve, was a blue U.S. passport card, and behind it the distinct hard plastic ID of a retired military officer. Reynolds looked at the dates. He looked at the rank. He looked at the face in the photo, and then at the face of the man on the bench. Reynolds closed his eyes for a second, taking a deep breath. He was watching a career-ending disaster unfold in real time. He turned to Vanner. "Agent Vanner," Reynolds said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Did you look at these?" Vanner shifted his weight. I glanced at the license, but he wouldn't answer questions about his birth country, so I assumed." "You assumed?" Reynolds cut him off. "You assumed that a man with a valid Arizona driver's license, a U.S. passport card, and a military ID was an illegal alien. Did you run his name?" "Not yet. I was just—" "You arrested a United States citizen. You arrested a decorated field-grade officer, and you brought him here in handcuffs without a single shred of probable cause." Reynolds turned back to Thorne. "Major Thorne," Reynolds said, his tone shifting to one of profound respect and apology. "I am incredibly sorry. This is a mistake. A terrible mistake." He pulled a key from his belt and immediately unlocked the handcuffs. Thorne rubbed his wrists. There were deep red indentations where the metal had dug in. "It is more than a mistake," Thorne said, standing up and towering over Vanner. "It is a violation of my civil rights. It is an assault, and it is a disgrace to the oath you all took." Reynolds turned to Vanner. "Badge and gun, now." Vanner's eyes went wide. "What, boss? I was just following a lead. You profiled a citizen, you ignored exculpatory evidence, and you violated agency policy and federal law. Put them on the desk. You are on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Get out of my building." Vanner, stunned and pale, unholstered his weapon and placed it on the desk. He unclipped his badge. He looked at Thorne, expecting maybe a moment of understanding, but found only a stone wall. He walked out of the processing room, his footsteps heavy in the silence. But the damage was already done. The videos from the parking lot were already online. By the time Thorne left the ICE office, driven home personally by Reynolds, the internet was on fire. The video showed everything. Thorne's calm compliance, Vanner's aggression, the refusal to look at ID. The caption, "ICE agent arrests black veteran for shopping," was trending globally. The backlash was immediate. Veterans organizations issued blistering statements. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund reached out to Thorne before he even got home. The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks later. It was a masterclass in civil litigation. It named Kyle Vanner, the Department of Homeland Security, the security firm that employed Derek Slayton and Market Choice for their negligent reporting policies. The complaint detailed counts of false imprisonment, assault, and battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and deprivation of rights under color of law. It highlighted the fact that Vanner had bypassed every protocol designed to prevent this exact situation. He had chosen bias over procedure. During the discovery phase, Vanner's personnel file was opened. It revealed a pattern of aggressive stops that had been flagged by previous supervisors but never acted upon. It showed that Vanner had a history of stopping black and Latino men based on flimsy pretexts. It showed that the agency knew he was a liability and had left him on the street. The security guard Derek Slayton was deposed. He crumbled under questioning, admitting that he had no evidence of any crime, just a feeling that Thorne didn't belong. Market Choice settled quickly for an undisclosed amount and fired the security firm. Slayton was fired and blacklisted from the security industry, but the case against Vanner and the federal government went to trial. The government tried to argue qualified immunity, claiming Vanner made a reasonable mistake. The judge threw that argument out, citing the fact that Vanner had refused to look at the valid ID Thorne offered. A reasonable officer, the judge noted, checks ID before arresting someone for not having ID. The trial lasted 5 days. Thorne took the stand. He spoke about his service. He spoke about the humiliation of being handcuffed in front of his neighbors. He spoke about the fear that he would be shot for reaching for his wallet. The jury, comprised of 8 women and 4 men, listened intently. They watched the video. They saw the arrogance of Vanner. They saw the dignity of Thorne. The verdict was unanimous. The jury found in favor of Marcus Thorne on all counts. They awarded him $2.9 million in compensatory damages for the trauma and reputational harm, but they didn't stop there. To send a message to the agency and to every officer who thinks a badge is a license to discriminate, they awarded an additional $5 million in punitive damages. A total of $7.9 million. Kyle Vanner was formally terminated. His name was added to the federal do not hire list, effectively ending his career in law enforcement or government security. The agency announced a sweeping overhaul of its engagement protocols. A new policy dubbed the Thorne Rule was implemented, mandating that agents must verify all offered identification on site before any physical detainment can occur, barring an immediate threat to life. As we reflect on this story, we are left with a sobering reality. Marcus Thorne did everything right. He served his country. He followed the law. He remained calm in the face of aggression. And yet none of that protected him from the bias of one man with a badge. It took a lawsuit and a national outcry to restore his dignity. But what about those who aren't retired majors? What about those who don't have the resources to fight back? Freedom shouldn't be conditional on who is watching. It shouldn't depend on whether you have the right friends or the right rank. It should be absolute. Major Thorne fought for that freedom overseas only to have to fight for it again in a parking lot in Phoenix. We want to hear from you. Do you think the $7.9 million judgment was enough to change the culture of these agencies? And should officers like Kyle Vanner face personal financial liability for these civil rights violations? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this story important, please share it. The more we shine a light on these injustices, the harder it becomes for them to hide in the shadows.